Nice Radio Callaloo presents Just Another Look. Just Another Look is an innovative, exciting, albeit decidedly provocative and yes, certainly controversial socio-political analysis of issues of a local, regional, and international nature. Just Another Look is heard only on Nice Radio. First aired on Saturdays at 6 p.m. with repeat broadcasts on Sundays at 9 p.m. You can always catch us on the World Wide Web, www.niceradio.info. You can check out our Just Another Look blog, or you can check us on YouTube. I am, of course, Keith Joseph. Today, dear friends, is Saturday. It is the 23rd day of May 2020. Welcome to another edition of your favorite program, Just Another Look. You know, dear friends, we are sure that the general elections will be taking place in St. Vincent and the Grenadines in 2020. And we have told you that there is this seemingly superstitious side to Ralph Gonsalves that allows him to place a lot of emphasis on the number 7. But also to place a number of emphasis on December. And you recognize that for a Vincentian, there are certain signs that you see coming from him that leave you pondering on whether it is genuine religious belief, religious faith, or whether it is superstition. But those who know and understand Gonsalves and his politics over the years may well be of the view that essentially he remains committed to some sort of socialist type ideals and ideas. And so we have argued that as we had seen with the politics of Parnell Campbell, Gonsalves likewise appears to have an understanding of the importance of religion and religious faith to the electorate. We have said on this program time and time again that religion has long been interwoven into the politics and the political culture of the Caribbean. And that has allowed politicians who hold that view to play a sort of game with a significant proportion of the electorate in Caribbean countries. Because they understand the impact that people's faith, people's religious beliefs have on them. And so it is commonplace in the Caribbean and in Caribbean political culture to find politicians and particularly political leaders placing a tremendous amount of emphasis on being able to quote scripture, to make biblical references, to make reference to God frequently in public discourse. Because they understand the importance, and we remember that in the elections for 2001, the Unity Labour Party did not only bring reggae artists to engage the younger people among the Vincentian electorate and the Rastafarian community, but among those who came and were engaged with Joseph Niles, and we used to say on this program, Joseph Niles with or without the consolers. Because it was important to capture that segment of the Vincentian electorate. And so we recognize, you remember that just another look. In the days when P.R. Campbell was a minister of government, and he had as part of his portfolio at one point information that he was seen so frequently at religious services, sometimes more than one in a single day. And we asked the question as to why did he then deem it necessary? And why was it that if you are of profound religious faith, it seemed fortuitous that you were at the religious activities that were being covered by the national radio station, NBC Radio 705. And so on each occasion there was mention of the presence of the Honorable Minister P.R. Campbell, etc., etc. And we raise concerns about that. We're not raising concerns about people's faith necessarily, but we are saying that there is an understanding in Caribbean political culture, and that we see it manifested in the politics of so many of those who put themselves up for office. And so when we look at what is happening around us, we ought not to be surprised of the apparent Gonzalez penchant for the number 7, so heavily engaged on all of his vehicles, or the seeming penchant for December as a time for holding elections. So there may well be reason for us to project that once the elections are being held this year in 2020, that they will take place in December. But you may recall that when he had this big set of hoorah about the Vincentian response to COVID-19. Even though we appeared very slow off the blocks, even though we appeared as though we were ignoring the signals and seemingly believing that it was not necessarily going to come to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And even though we had to wait until after Harvey Farrell, a former employee in the Ministry of Health, Wellness and the Environment, was on air berating the administration for its weak-need response, for its failure to bring information to the public in a timely manner, that kicked off the government's response, literally. That once the event got started, Just Another Look maintains the view that the ruling administration saw the opportunity, because we believe largely Gonzales is politically opportunistic. There's little reason for us to show otherwise, and little evidence for him to convince us otherwise. That he's a political opportunist, it shows in many respects. And as has happened with natural disasters or near natural disasters that have taken place in this country, particularly in the year of or the year prior to general elections, and the way in which the ruling Unity Labour Party appears to be able to make capital of those things. Just Another Look was very clear that there was no stimulus package. That what we had was instead a 2020 general elections rescue economic package. That's what it was. And the more we get closer to December, the more Vincentians are beginning to realize the extent to which the party appears to be exploiting that situation. And the more Vincentians are becoming aware of the politics of Gonzales and his Unity Labour Party, and how much he dominates that politics. And that is the reason that you're getting more callers to radio stations. That is the reason you're getting more responses to the print media. That is the reason more people are engaged on a day-to-day basis in the politics of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And that is the reason that Gonzales and his minions are now trying to find themselves on every possible media source as often as is possible in order to control the conversation. Because people have come to an understanding, an awareness of the political practices of the ruling regime. And that the way things took place in the past can no longer prove viable for the ruling regime. So now more than ever, the average Vincentian is politically aware enough to be asking far more questions about every action taken by the ruling regime. The pressure is so much on Gonzales that you're now getting so much political garbage coming out of him that the mistakes are being made over and over and over again. And you recognize that he has lost it politically. That the dynamism that he once had has gone. And so he can no longer control the conversation in the way in which he did in the past. That's why you've seen his response to Bing Joseph, Dwight Bing Joseph, on Boom Radio. That's why you've seen his response to Too Cool Chris. That's why you see him now achieving perhaps something he long wanted to achieve, which was to be on so many different pages of the local newspapers. That is something he always had a penchant for. To be seen as controlling the narrative, as the contemporary sloganeering goes. But he's no longer able to control the narrative. And when he does make forays, it is literally, well, practically, like putting one's feet in one's mouth. That's why we had the problem between himself and Grenada. So Keith Mitchell says one thing, and he felt that it's necessary to go public and respond. And then when everybody says, look, enough, you're too big Caribbean politicians, you're too old Caribbean politicians, control yourselves. Here we go again. And out of the blue, he makes a comment about two Grenadians who came off the first cruise liner that brought passengers home some time ago. And then the Grenadian minister responds. And then he says, well, I wasn't casting any aspersions. So why you raise it? As two elderly politicians, yourself and James and Keith Mitchell, ought not to have gotten into the public spat that you did. But it speaks volumes of the pettiness that drives our political leaders even in this century. They cannot show the political maturity that one would have hoped would have come with independence. They reflect, both Keith Mitchell and Rolf Gonsalves today reflect the worst aspects of just what C.L.R. James was talking about. Our Caribbean leaders' inability to rid themselves of the plantation mentality, to rid themselves of the legacy of slavery. Because they behave as though their only understanding of political leadership is to do to us what the conquistadores and the colonizers did to us. They're simply local variants. That's what they have shown us. The immaturity, the puerility, the political puerility that passes for leadership in the Caribbean today. They cannot extricate themselves. It doesn't matter whether you have a PhD, you know. Political puerility, political stupidity has nothing to do with your official academic qualifications. So we know that elections are coming. But as they are coming, Gonsalves appears overly anxious, uncertain as to whether he can wield his magic wand and bring his party home to yet another victory, for which, trust us here just a little, he and his party may be willing to do just about anything to have. But the Vincentian public is undergoing tremendous change in how they see things. And is uncomfortable as to what his political stance. But he has him and his minions are all over the place. You see Little Boy Blue blowing his horn just about everywhere about health. And amazingly, and unfortunately, some media houses appear to be taking Little Boy Blue seriously enough to start referencing his Facebook page for news. Why would anybody want to do that? Little Boy Blue of all people. Why would you want to do that when there's a health ministry? Official health ministry. You ought not to be having to look to Little Boy Blue's Facebook page to be able to get at the truth. Whatever he wants to do, whatever time of the day or night, that's his business on his Facebook page. But we have officialdom. And we ought to be using the official media. That's why we had the confusion some time ago. Because Little Boy Blue is not a communications specialist. Luke Brown has much to learn about communication. But like Gonzalez and the other ministers, they take the media as often as is possible. They need to be seen and heard as often as is possible. This is Saboto Caesar. All over the place. Talking agriculture, talking food security. But rather interestingly, during the course of this last week, while Saboto Caesar was talking about our exports of agricultural products and how well we are doing, etc., etc., SBG Television News highlighted the plight of some of our farmers in the face of the serious drought that is taking place. So on the one hand, he's guaranteeing us food security, while the people who are producing the food are saying, well, wait a minute, many of us have difficulty with water. Many of us have crops in the ground that are spoiling. So is Saboto Caesar living on a different planet from the farming community that SVG TV was able to talk to? And you heard agricultural officers talking about the options that people have and what they can or cannot dry, etc., etc. But not everybody has the wherewithal to access the greenhouses, to be able to run irrigation lines, etc., etc., as some have been fortunate to do. But it is most challenging to find that the minister is out front carrying the banner. Perhaps he's aware that he still has to fight for leadership against Camilo if he wants to control that party and become a prime minister of this country one day. But he also has to win his seat. And he also has to try to be seen to be helping the party win the next general election. But he's caught between the devil and the deep blue sea because the reality of what is happening to farmers in St. Vincent and the Grenadines appears to be at variance with what he as Minister of Agriculture appears to be preaching to the nation about food security, about agricultural development, about the capacity for us to provide access for our farmers to external markets. So is he or is he not for real? Is he or is he not for real? What measures is he putting in place to address those farmers who are suffering from what appears to them to be a chronic drought, lacking access to water supplies? So it's interesting that on Wednesday evening, SVG TV News carries the plight of the farmers. On Thursday evening, SVG TV News carries the minister talking agriculture and then juxtaposes against that the farmers' plight. So we have an understanding of the seeming disparity between what one is saying as a politician on the one hand and what the farmers are saying, their harsh realities on the other. But the Prime Minister of this country seemingly hell-bent on another term in office, and perhaps the creation of a political family dynasty, is attempting to suggest we are doing so wonderfully well that we have projects coming out of our ears, and then to boast of the millions that we are getting in assistance from hither, thither, and yon with regard to responding to the impact of COVID-19 on our economy. So we are talking about giving small businesses the money that we did recently. And we outline how many people we give startup businesses, etc. But Luke Boye, on one of his morning programs during the course of the week, made a very valid point. To him, it seems a little bit difficult to accept that in this guava season, when we are all looking at what is happening across the world, when we are looking at the impact on economies across the world, are we taking enough time to look at the impact of the pandemic on our own economies? And the reason he's suggesting that is because the impact on the economy is again. It is not in any way different from what is happening in other parts of the world. Yes, some of our businesses, we've not closed down our businesses. But how many of them are doing as well as they did prior to the pandemic? Restaurateurs are having challenges. Hoteliers are having challenges. And as somebody wrote recently, the fact that the government is insisting that the cruise lines pay for the quarantine of some of the sailors, of some of the sailors, may well be helping some hotels. Well, with the hotels closed, many of our small farmers who were supplying hoteliers with agricultural products have had to shut down because of spoilage. So have we assessed that impact? Small businesses have suffered because while the government was pussyfooting about its response to the pandemic, the Vincentian community was monitoring what was happening abroad. The same people who send remittances home have had less to send. And they speak to their families. They explain to their families the ravages of the pandemic and its economic impact. And so some people have been a little bit more cautious about where they go, where they gather, etc., etc., even before we talked about social distancing here, because the message here was so mixed up, so confusing, that people just ignored them altogether and went with what was being told on cable networks across the world. Scientists don't yet know enough about COVID-19. But we here have surmised that we do. We know more than everybody else, as is always the case. But we can't really tell. We don't really know because we have not done any major research ourselves as to why we have only had mild cases. And all of them, for the most part in the early days, came from abroad. So why did they come with mild cases, even though they contracted the disease while abroad? Even though they came from areas that were ravaged and being ravaged by the pandemic. We don't know. There is a lot of guesswork in the business grenadines generally with regard to health. Now there's a lot of guesswork globally with regard to health, as the scientists themselves try to unravel the mysteries attendant to the COVID-19 pandemic. Everywhere scientists are saying this thing is evolving, this thing is new, and the dynamics are changing on a regular basis. We simply do not know. We try to get a handle on things, but we do not know. But instead, this is we know. So we are encouraging in this guava season to start businesses. And it is the reason we say that Gonzales is losing it, and has been for some time, because he does not seem to be in sync with what is happening around the world and the impact. Remember, that coming from a CARICOM forum on discussing the emergent situation with the pandemic, Gonzales says this is an excellent opportunity for us to seek to develop intra-regional travel. People are afraid to fly. Airlines stopped flying because of the problems. And he came back with a great idea in the midst of an emergent pandemic that this is an excellent idea to promote intra-regional travel. Of course, we only have a set of small planes that everybody jam up. So how in God's name is it? So to show you how out of touch he was, that he didn't seem to understand what was happening around him. And that was how many months ago? He doesn't talk about that nonsense anymore. But he saw it as an opportunity to promote intra-regional travel and went with that publicly. Much to the chagrin it must have been to scientists and those involved in the medical fraternity, who know what they're doing, by the way. Not just any and everybody. Because not everybody in the medical fraternity seems to have a clue of what they're doing and saying. So he came out and grabbed the headline. The Vincentian Prime Minister, in the face of an emergent pandemic, suggests it's an excellent opportunity to promote intra-regional travel. But go long, bro. Go long. None of his ministers dared suggest otherwise. And even now, they dare not condemn him for having been so outlandish. But it was all bravado, which is the nature of his politics. It all appeared politically opportunistic. Everybody was going in one direction, you head in the other one, because you're brighter than everybody else. So we were going to promote intra-regional travel in the face of a pandemic where people are being told not to travel. Tremendously intellectually superior, that level of thinking. Because the rest of the world hasn't caught up with that level of thinking yet. But that is leadership for you. That is leadership for you. But that is consistent with the politics of Gonzales. Because you can play with the gift of gab and hope that a significant proportion of those listening do not understand or just taken in by what was once charisma that is no longer there, that has long since lost its luster. Because we can grab the headlines, even though we're talking utter trite. We can grab the headline and get a whole lot of people to jump up and say, see, that is the ideas man. That is the real ideas man. That is the problem that we've had. Because if you don't engage in critical thinking, you just buy whatever he says lock, stock and barrel. It never occurs to his minions to say, but wait, how is it only now we're thinking that we could take the arrows and put this in the school feeding program? But guess what? We're suggesting that when we have no schools. So presumably, we're going to store it up to make it available for when schools eventually open. Yeah? And those minions who have unwittingly been caught up in the political garbage that Gonzales spews from time to time have not come to a recognition, unless it pinches them, it hurts them directly. Remember, after winning election in 2001, the ULP administration attempted to roll back some of the practices that they had apparently supported. You remember the attempt at trying to get vendors off the street? You remember the fracas when the police were swooping into Kingstown and taking people's vending tables and stools and seats and benches off the street, throwing it in the back of a police truck and going with it? What did the vendors say? When you were in opposition and the New Democratic Party in office attempted to move us from the street, you encouraged us to stay. Now you want to move us? That is why the vending is still on the street. Despite attempts at trying to do something about it, it remains exactly as it was. And we have more people vending on the street now than back then. Because in the eagerness to gain political access, the Unity Labour Party sided with the vendors. Don't let them run you off the street. You have a right to earn a living. But when you got into office, suddenly it was unsightly. Remember, they were going to design structures that all vendors would have to use. You remember those things? Those are now out the window. Because the people woke up and said, smell the coffee, ULP. You told us it was all right to stay here. At that time, you didn't tell us about any structured approach and any specific structures we all had to adhere to, etc., etc. Don't come with that now. With elections coming every 5 years, you had to back off. Isn't that what happened? The brilliant academic approach to the politics did not work. You can't play fish today and want to play foul tomorrow. You either, or you can't be both. And the electorate told you that. So you had to concede. And so voila, we're still at square one. Remember that the minibus owners and operators with a backbone, apart from Julian Francis and his 18, they were critical to your roadblock of 2000. They were critical. They supported you. But once you got into office, and they raised Cain about the price of parts and the fares, the need to raise fares in the face of rising cost of living, etc. You weren't listening. And so they said, okay, we will take action. You quickly responded and gave them what they want. But it appears that at the back of your mind, you may well have had other ideas, because now we are seeing that you love the van drivers and them so much because of what they did for you in 2000 with the roadblock. You love them so much that now you are seizing the opportunity afforded you by the pandemic to tell them that after the pandemic, your 18-seater will only be able to carry 14. We're making it permanent. Yeah? Now you're seizing the opportunity of the pandemic to tell them that once the pandemic is over, we're allowing you to carry 12. Remember, we moved from 12 to 8. Move from 18 to 12. Then to 8. Now we're going back to 12. Right? So they can now carry 12 passengers during the pandemic. But the newspaper dated Friday 22nd May juxtaposes the two articles. On the right hand side, on page 4, at the bottom it says minivans can now carry 12 instead of 9 passengers. I mentioned 8, it's 9 passengers. Okay? But right next to that, on the left-hand side of the same page 4, the newspaper carries an interesting article. Law coming to reduce minibus seating capacity from 18 to 14. And the article says, and we quote, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and Grenadines, Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, has indicated that the law will be changed to make minibuses from 18-seaters to 14-seaters. Right? And he says, I indicated to them that I want to change the law. I want to change the law. I want to change the law. Yeah? So, he's suddenly changing the law. But many will not be sorry for the minibus owners and operators, because they think you were part of the roadblock. And at that time, there was no consideration as to whether you were carrying 20 or 21 people in your 18-seater by the same ULP. But now, after 20 years in office, they can do you what they want. And he can tell you, well, we're using the pandemic as an opportunity to revise the situation so that once the pandemic is finished, you can go to 14 passengers. Understand how school keeping. Understand how school keeping. So the minivan and minibus operators now have to contend with the fact that Papa decides. Papa decides. And you have to have an understanding, when we say here at Just Another Look, that it is a benevolent dictatorship that Gonsalves is running. You have to understand very clearly how school is keeping. Because we told you that when Ralph Gonsalves was able to say in 2001, and when I swivel in the big chair, When I swivel in the big chair, that was his childlike response to accessing prime ministership. When I swivel in the big chair, like a little child getting marbles for the first time or a piece of cake. When I swivel in the big chair. Right? The assumption of power. And the significance of that was made manifest by Glenn Jackson's repetition of the fact that we are in power. He used to say it with a certain amount of venom. We are in power. And the minions understood that meant it's our time now. It is the reason that one of their leaders could have got up at the convention and say, without fear of contradiction, we ought to own the jobs too. A man of religion, declaring publicly at a convention of the Unity Labour Party, we ought to own the jobs too. In other words, a man of religion who's supposed to exude love for neighbor, love thy neighbor as thyself, says publicly we ought to own the jobs too. In other words, only one set of people supposed to survive in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Those who support the Unity Labour Party. That's coming from a man of religion. How do you then face your congregation? Christ says it's not only those who show faith in him. It's not only the Jews that I'm here for. Yeah? What's the message of the Good Samaritan? What was the message of the woman at the well? What was the message from the reading in the synagogue? Why was he here? What was the message on the cross? In his last breath? To the thief at his side. What were the messages? And yet, a religious official allows his politics to so get control of him that at a party convention you can declare to the members present, we must own the jobs too. In other words, let me forget for the moment all that I'm telling you about religion and hope that my parishioners and the faithful and the believers don't really understand what I'm saying here. But we as a political party must own the jobs too. That is why the Vincentian public has lost confidence in the ruling Unity Labour Party. They recognize over the last 20 years that that is exactly what has happened. Make sure you own the jobs. Recognize, nobody talks about this St. Vincent Labour Party. It has no legacy within the existing administration. And over time, you've kept one or two little former Labour people around to suggest that Labour still had some relevance. But everything has been dominated by the people who supported Gonzales and his movement for national unity. Ask them. Ask them. They came to get their moment in the sun. They didn't care, and they still don't care. The leftovers and the ruminants of the left. Anything that sounds remotely left, they're there. But the leftovers and the ruminants of the left are being left out of the critical decision-making process. That's the only left you have. You're left out. So you have to go and try to sneak in on a radio station or try to be belly up, bellicose, and boastful in support of the ruling regime in order to make sure that you capture some of the droppings from the master's table. Because the droppings they are compared to what the master is using. Yeah? But to show you, right? To show you the approach of benevolence and of a benevolent and a benevolent dictatorship. The Prime Minister then says in another place, sometimes I don't want to bother the empire, because sometimes Vinlek behave like it is an empire, you know. They behave like they are a government unto themselves. This is his institution. The leadership of that institution has been put there in place by the government. So you have to take responsibility for Vinlek. You have to take responsibility for it. So you can't be fish and fowl. You either or. On the one hand, you was working to ensure that Vinlek responds to the needs of the Vincentian populace. And now you're trying to give the impression, it's not me, you know, it's them. It's never you. It's always somebody else. It's always somebody else. So you control government. You know everything that's happening in government. You make sure you know everything that happened in government. And when you're ready, you tell us so. You told us very early in your reign in 2001. The prime minister means first. First, I am the head. I am the first. I must know what is happening all around. You told us that. But you could tell the people now, because you have something up your sleeve, eh? Elections is what is up your sleeve. And you want the poor masses to believe that Vinlek is operating ultra vires. That Vinlek is doing its own thing. And that you love the poor so much that sometimes I don't want to bother the empire. Huh? You want the poor people to believe it's not you, it's not your administration. It's Vinlek. Sometimes Vinlek behave like it's an empire, you know. You who run government, telling the poor people of this country who may have challenges with meeting their bill payments to Vinlek, you are telling them they behave like they're a government unto themselves. That's what you tell them. Yeah? That's what you tell them. So, you are saying, or attempting to give the impression, that you have left Vinlek to his own devices. And you sit and you watch them behave as though they are a government unto themselves. And you come and you tell that to the nation. You're trying to make poor people believe that you are so much on their side that you're willing to cut the throat of the very people your administration has put in charge of Vinlek. So if the people start to complain about water, you will do that to Garth Saunders and others too? Because what you're doing here with Thornley Myers is exactly that. But Thornley is one of the persons that you all put there. And you know why they put him there. And you know how he got there. And you know why he stays there. So is it now that you want to send a message to Thornley, then call Thornley and tell him. You don't have to hang them out to dry.